Okay, morning. Can see we've got a decent attendance already, so I will make a slow start, conscious that it is a very warm morning in the UK. So yeah, we don't want to take up too much of your time being stuck on calls. We do have quite an exciting agenda today, so very hot topic all around AI. The main focus here is to just talk about how AI and human intelligence can really be used together. Ultimately, that is what we're trying to talk through today. So just a quick intro on my side. So my name's Luke. I'm the Microsoft practice lead at CyberOne. As a very brief overview of myself, so a lot of what I do is focused on making sure our services deliver, really great value to our customers and making sure that I keep my sort of finger on the pulse of industry trends. Hence why we're talking about AI today. Prior to being in CyberOne, I was in PwC for 2 years, also leading their Microsoft practice. And prior to that, was in Microsoft itself for 8 years as an engineer and then as an architect as well. So that's me. Lewis, do you want to do a quick intro on your end?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Luke. Thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Lewis. I'm the head of cyber threat defense at CyberOne. I've been in the industry for over 8 years now, specifically with CyberOne for must be 6 at this point. The focus of me is ensuring that our operations covering technology, people, process, etc., are as efficient and proficient as they possibly can be. In addition to this, I help to sort of drive the innovation within the business as in relation to how we handle things such as detection and protection of threats that we see for our clients. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Right, so I'll just do a quick run through of CyberOne. I can see some friendly faces on the call, so welcome to people who regularly attend these. Appreciate your time, and also there's plenty of new people as well. So just to make sure we're all on the same page. So CyberOne, we are an MSSP. We have been in operation for around 20 years now, with obviously a focus on cyber. Just to call out a few major credentials that we have. So we are very proud to be certified by Crest in 3 different areas. So pen testing, incident response, and SOC. And in addition to that, we have 2 NCSC badges. So for those who may not know, NCSC is sort of the major cyber body in the UK. Beyond those as well, we also have quite a wide range of Microsoft certifications, one of which we picked up quite recently around data and AI, which is, let's say, pretty relevant given the topic today. And yeah, we are a Microsoft specialist in a number of areas, security obviously being the primary one there. It's worth mentioning as well that, we were first to market with some of the Microsoft offerings that we have, particularly around Microsoft Sentinel and our MDR service using our managed SOC. So with that quick intro done, there is actually 2 really interesting, really great pieces of news that I wanted to share as well. So these are quite hot off the press. These have been announced maybe 2 weeks or so back. So the first one is that we have brought a lady called Tracy Pretorius to our board. So Tracy works for Microsoft and is a senior director of threat intelligence. So we're really proud to have Tracy kind of working with our executive team. I think it demonstrates, very well how, closely knit we are with Microsoft, shows their investment in us and obviously vice versa. So very, very proud to have Tracy on board. It's worth mentioning as well that Tracy is very, very senior. Ultimately, she reports up to Satya Nadella, so she's only 1 or 2 sort of place in hierarchy away from him. So she is very senior and has a really key role in Microsoft. So we get a lot of insight from her, which is extremely valuable for our services. Beyond that, InfoSec Europe is in London this year. So again, something that we're really happy about is Microsoft have invited us to join them on their stand. So if you are around, please come and say hello. There'll be a number of, myself will be there certainly, as well as a whole range of our CyberOne team. So if you are attending InfoSec, please come and say hello. So with all of that out the way, just as a quick overview of the agenda, we've got 5 major topics, and all of these will take us through a bit of a story around how AI has changed the industry, how it continues to change the industry, and also we'll give you some real world examples of cyber threats that have leveraged AI. So yeah, with that said, in terms of some of you, I know will have seen some of my webinars before, so I always like to scare everybody at the beginning by bringing up some really worrying statistics. So The thing that I want to flag here is the if you look at the GDP of cybercrime, it's around $9.2 trillion annually, and that puts it as the third largest economy in the world, which it almost sounds impossible. It sounds like I'm just making this up here, but this is a real stat. This is something that Statista, who are, a well-trusted kind of research company, they publish this data every year. I've used this data before, probably around a year and a half, 2 years ago, and I believe the figure then was about 7.5 trillion. So in the space of a year and a half or 2 years, the annual GDP of cybercrime has grown by quite a chunk, which is really quite worrying. Now, the other scary stat on the right-hand side is that the actual growth rate itself is around 15%. So again, if you compare that to some of the largest economies in the world, cybercrime is just growing at a truly exponential and quite unbelievable rate. And I think it's fair to say that the increased growth that we've seen over the last year or so, a lot of that is driven by AI, because of a number of things that we'll learn about today. So beyond that, a few more bits of interesting data. So this is all around the cybersecurity workforce. So in yellow, we have the active cyber workforce as it stands. About 5.5 million people are skilled in cybersecurity and work in cybersecurity jobs. Now, that's all great, right? But the worrying part is in red there, which is that is the gap, that is the deficit, if you like, of skilled cyber personnel. So again, there's around, let's call it 5 million there. There's around 5 million, unfilled cyber roles in the industry, and that has grown 19% over last year. So again, really worrying, right? What this basically says in the most plain language possible is that the total workforce to fill the global demand of cyber personnel is about 10.2 million, and we only have just over half of that. So there is a huge gap. Now, the logic is that, often it's due to budgets, right? You can see on the right-hand side, around 39% of business leaders have said that budget constraints are part of the reasons for their cybersecurity shortfall. This could be, their staff. It could also be the technology investment as well. But certainly budgets is a big part of why we have this, almost 50% gap between active and, desired workforce. Now, can AI fill that gap? Potentially, it can fill some of it, but I think as we learn throughout today's webinar, we'll realize that it can't fulfill all of those, 5 million missing roles. And the last bit of worrying information before we get a bit more positive. So these are stats from Microsoft themselves, who obviously have quite a large play in the AI space. So what Microsoft have identified is that close to 80% of people are bringing their own AI tools to work. So you've got the idea of bring your own beer, bring your own device. Well, now we've got bring your own AI. Pretty worrying that around 80% of employees are doing that. And really the simple example would be, I might use ChatGPT to help me with my job, which may seem relatively benign, but the problem is if I'm importing, customer data, personal information, company intellectual property, if I'm just, typing all of that into something like ChatGPT, I'm basically, leaking information out of my business, and that's a real concern. In the middle, then, we have around 57% of organizations have seen a rise in incidents caused by the use of AI. So again, relating to that first stat, if I start to input customer data or business data into an open source AI platform, I'm leaking information. It's ultimately a data breach. So that's why that number is so high. And then in orange on the right-hand side, around 60% of organizations have yet to implement an AI-specific control. So you should have some, in fact, it's worth mentioning now that you should have some questions pop up throughout this session. It'd be great if you could answer those because it just gives us some data on, what your businesses are dealing with at the moment. So we do have a question in there around what is your AI policy. And I have to say, my assumption is that many of you will not have an AI policy as it stands right now. That is what we're noticing generally in the industry and what we as an MSSP have come across a number of times over the last couple of years. So again, really worrying, right? what these stats are basically what they're showing us is that AI is heavily used, it's misused because company data is being, uploaded into that AI, and then the organizations themselves don't have a policy defining how employees should or shouldn't use AI. You can see the problems with all of these areas. Okay, so I've given you some worrying statistics and made, kind of opened on a pessimistic front, but we'll get a bit more positive now. So, in my view, AI is ultimately a force multiplier. And this is a positive thing, right? So, I'm going to talk you through a couple of examples. If we think of some basic things, so a computer, which ultimately is what AI is, can process information far more quickly than a human. That's kind of a given. Additional things would be that AI doesn't get tired, right? It can't get sick. It can't get distracted. It doesn't take time off. It doesn't have a baby and go on maternity or paternity leave. It's always there and is always operational, providing we're paying the bill. It's never going to, let us down in that sense. Um, it can perform actions instantly. So in the context of a SOC, for example, AI could pretty much generate a notification within a couple of seconds. It may even be able to take a containment action or a response action in a couple of seconds. Now, a human, it may take a couple of minutes, and you may think the time difference there is inconsequential, but when you think of the big picture, a business may receive, dozens of alerts and incidents per day. If you're saving, 2 minutes here, 3 minutes there, over and over again, that's a lot of time, and it could add up to hours. Certainly across a week or month, you've got dozens of hours being saved there just by leveraging AI. It also actually has an effect of minimizing alert fatigue for the human team themselves. So as I said, people get tired. The AI can minimize the alert fatigue that your team receive by dealing with the low-hanging fruit, by handling the noise. And obviously that creates a scenario where the human analysts in a SOC, for example, can focus on the big ticket items. And that, it frees them up, right? They can focus on the things that matter the most, and the AI can deal with the noisy stuff. Something else AI can be used for is predicting the future. Now, there is some caveats around this, and I'll go into this idea a bit more later on. But ultimately, if you give AI a load of data, it can process that information very quickly and may then be able to predict things based off of the information you've provided it with. So it can be used for threat intelligence, and we're seeing, that there is a lot of threat intelligence products out there now that at least state that they use AI as part of their mechanism. Now, whether they do or not is a different question. Being honest, I think every application in the world right about now says it uses AI. Now, whether it does or not is a different question, but certainly it can be used for threat intelligence. Threat hunting as well. So again, if you were to feed AI loads of information about a particular organization, it will be able to give you an idea of what kind of threat might be most prevalent in that business, and then it can hone in on those things and try and proactively identify them. So again, it can be used to do large bits of computation quite quickly. A key bit here on that final bullet point, so AI can detect non-contextual patterns far quicker than a human. So non-contextual is the key word there. Just keep that in the back of your mind because I'm going to, again, focus on that as we go through today's content. Okay, so now Gen AI, it is actually a double-edged sword in a lot of ways. Uh, sorry, 1 second. I've just lost my cursor there. So yeah, it is a double-edged sword. So if you think of the categories on the left-hand side, there is a pro and a con to these. So in terms of AI defense, and this is obviously the good side of the equation. So if we think of phishing and social engineering, AI can be used to train our employees. Okay, so we can train them with realistic AI-generated phishing emails, and that's really great. But on the negative side, on the bad side, what that means is that, of course, the bad actors out there can use the same technology to create those phishing emails, to create deepfake content and other social engineering sort of mechanisms. So these are the pro and cons that we're coming across. What I would say, generally speaking, here is that across all these examples, is that Gen AI and AI in general accelerates both the defender's ability to defend and the attacker's ability to attack, and it lowers the barrier to entry for everybody. And again, this idea of lowering the barrier to entry is a theme that we'll come across a couple of times. What we also have is code generation. So AI can generate code. Again, that can be for good purposes or bad purposes. We also then have threat intelligence. So AI can be used by, a pen tester or red teaming or purple teaming, for example. But simultaneously, a bad actor could use that for misinformation purposes, which again is obviously quite a concern. Around automation, you can use AI to create automated playbooks, automated response actions, and containment actions. But unfortunately, that also means that AI can be used to adapt attack techniques, even on the fly in some cases. And again, there's examples that we'll talk about soon about polymorphism and how AI can have quite a big impact there. In terms of data security, so what we could do is use AI to train our models and train them on how to secure our data, how to consider things like privacy. But then, on the other hand, offensive AI could be used to extract our sensitive information and do bad things to it. So there's always this kind of pro and con problem. It's a cat and mouse, and ultimately, what I would say generally is the attacker has first mover advantage in pretty much all cases. So as the good guys, we are often reacting to innovations the bad guys make. We then have to resolve and find solutions to those malicious innovations. Now, to give you some specific examples of the things we've just talked through, so ultimately it's an armor race. Like I said, attackers have first mover advantage, and there's some real scary stuff out there. So I'm going to take you through a few examples. So the first one here is something called Worm GPT. This is ultimately used for social engineering, and the idea is that it can create phishing emails, it can create social engineering techniques. So it could create clones of people's voices, it could create deepfake video content, and it can also be used more generically for malicious code. Beyond that, we have something called Fraud GPT. So Fraud GPT could be used to create a scam website. Some of you may know that as a watering hole, for example. It could also be used to create fake identities. And you can imagine the potential ramifications of that. So again, there's an AI for kind of fraud-based malicious behavior. Now, this next one is quite interesting. So Darkbert, apart from having a great name, it's interesting because this was developed by researchers. So it isn't developed by a bad guy. It's developed, ultimately to discover how useful AI could be if we were to train it on dark web data. So what these researchers did is they developed a Darkbert and trained it on the dark web. Ultimately, what they proved with this is that you can create an AI that is all of its knowledge, everything it's been trained on, has ultimately come from some kind of bad action, come from some malicious action, so a data breach, for example. And you can imagine you've got now this large data set powered by an AI that an adversary could use to scrape all of the data on the dark web, within a very short period of time. So interesting that, it's developed by a research team ultimately to test this theory. But if we think about it in practical terms, a bad guy could use this same tool or something similar for malicious behavior. In addition to that, there's also something called Poison GPT. Now, this one has a number of different use cases, really, but just to go through some of them. Let's say, GitHub is obviously a huge place for code, access to code repository and applications. Now, if as a bad guy, I might have the idea that, okay, I'm going to create a malicious AI. I'm going to publish that onto GitHub, and then people might come across my GitHub project and actually use my code base. And without knowing it, people using my GitHub project are now ultimately poisoning their own solutions by using my malicious code disguised as some kind of AI tool. And these are things that are really happening, right? So everything that I'm showing you here, these aren't theoretical. These are actual things that exist right now. You can go and Google any of these and you'll see articles and other detail about them. Other examples of how Poison GPT models can be used is they could actually maliciously modify open source code. So if I've got an open source AI, I could have the general public feeding that information. Well, if you have bad actors also feeding it information, you could spread misinformation, and that could be for political reasons or any number of other reasons, right? But again, these are real concerns. So next one, Black Mamba. This is probably the most interesting one, but perhaps the most dangerous one in a lot of ways. So Black Mamba, again, this was developed, as a proof of concept. So it wasn't created, uh, as a malicious tool in it, by a bad actor. It was ultimately created by researchers again. And what they were trying to do is put together a proof of concept that proves that a real bad actor could use a large language model for malicious purposes. Now, the way Black Mamba works is it's ultimately a benign executable. So it could be a Word document, it could be an application. It's just something that, somebody could execute and launch on their computer. Because it's benign, it doesn't, there's nothing malicious in it from the beginning. It's not going to be blocked by antivirus or, EDR and XDR tools. So what that means is I can deploy Black Mamba to a number of devices in my target network. Now, when someone executes Black Mamba, they actually open the application and run it. What happens is it will then query a large language model. So it could query ChatGPT as an example, although it could also query the other models on this screen. So I could have a Black Mamba application that is querying, say, Fraud GPT or Worm GPT. I'll then ask that, GPT model to give me some malicious code, and then I will execute that code within Black Mamba. So you have what ultimately was originally a benign file becomes a malicious file because of its use and interaction with a large language model. So very, very dangerous. And that's an example of polymorphism as well, where an application can change its behavior on the fly. That's the idea of polymorphic malware or polymorphic code. And then the final one here, so AutoGPT. AutoGPT, again, the idea of this model is that we are automating things. Now, automation can be used for lots of purposes, but in this context, it's being used for attacks. So again, problems there where an attacker can reduce their reliance on a human and instead use an AI to automate various parts of their attack kill chain. So all of these are real, like I said, feel free to look them up in your own time. I just want to expand slightly on what I've talked about so far, and this is just some basic kind of motivations or examples. And again, I want to highlight that AI ultimately enables bad actors to firstly perform more sophisticated attacks, but it also lowers the barrier to entry, and that's really critical. Ultimately, anyone on this webinar right now could use the same techniques that I'm about to show you to generate some malicious code. So the first example is I could ask an AI to write me a script. You can see, interestingly, in this screenshot, that AI is actually cautioning down at the bottom there. It's mentioning ethics, which is something I'll come on to soon. But the AI is saying, this could be a bit dodgy here. So, maybe just use this, in a good way. But of course, the AI doesn't know my motivation. I could tell it, look, I'm doing this for all the best reasons and best motivations. But really, I'm a bad actor. The AI can't interpret my intention there. So within seconds, ultimately, and a quick, prompt there, I've got a batch script that can be used to extract passwords. So it takes some number of seconds to put that together. In addition to that, I could ask AI to create a phishing email for me. And again, within a number of seconds, I've got a template that I can then use. And that could be great if English is not my first language, or, I need to target a Japanese company and I don't speak Japanese. I could just ask it to create that same phishing email in any number of languages, and it would do it, fairly convincingly for me. The final one here, and again, these are all high-level examples, but the final one is just gaining knowledge. So if you look at the prompt in the upper right-hand corner, the prompt actually says, I'm a pen tester, and I'm trying to learn what I need to do about a particular vulnerability. So I'm telling the AI, look, I'm a good guy. I'm a pen tester. This is part of my job. But the AI then is giving me loads of information about this vulnerability. And it's even linked me a YouTube video where I can go and watch and learn about this vulnerability. But of course, I could be lying. I'm not a pen tester. I'm actually going to try and exploit this vulnerability because I'm a bad actor. But again, the AI doesn't know that, and I can very easily trick it by just pretending to be a pen tester. So these are just really simple examples, but any one of us right now could go and do this. It would take a number of minutes in total, and you would have some kind of output that could be used for bad purposes. Um, we're going to go through some more detailed examples later today, but hopefully this has kind of made it very clear how easy this is to, if you wanted to be, we could all be a little bit evil today. So, although the main focus of today is around AI, I do want to just list out some of more general pre-breach strategies. So everything on screen, and I'm not going to read through all of them, but everything on screen here we need to be considering in our overall cybersecurity strategy. So some of these use AI, some of them may not, but just to call out a couple, right? Zero trust architecture is becoming more important because the idea of zero trust ultimately is that we don't trust anything. We must always verify everything on our network. And if we take that mindset, what we're basically saying is we think that a compromise could originate from any user, from any device, from any application. And therefore, we must protect all of our users' devices and applications. So zero trust in the AI landscape is hugely important. And there's a number of other things on screen there, but yeah, like I said, I will just move forward. So now we're going to ask and answer a question. Is human intelligence replaceable? Uh, I'm tempted here just to give you the answer. In my opinion, no. And now I'm going to justify why that is. So the first thing here is that AI can identify what is happening, but a human can understand why something is happening. So that context, that human intuition is really critical. A human might be able to distinguish between some kind of anomaly and something more strategic like an insider threat, whereas an AI may not necessarily pick up on that nuance. Um, as an extension of that point, novel attacks where there's a lot of sort of ultimately benign behavior that as an individual behavior isn't something malicious, but as looking at the grand big picture could be part of a larger attack. Something novel like that could be missed by an AI, and that's because AIs are trained on a certain model. And again, I'll talk about why training and models are quite important soon. Beyond that, although to be honest, very similar to what I've just mentioned. So human vigilance, the idea is that a person may be able to detect something that is low and slow. So an attack that is rather than coming in as a big bang and trying to immediately compromise a business within an hour of the attack launching, there's a lot of attacks that actually are low and slow, where they try to make as little noise as possible and ultimately just take very small steps towards compromising a business over a long period of time. Now, an AI may miss that kind of thing because there's no inherent pattern to it, but that's the kind of thing a person could pick up on because they can interpret things differently. They can understand context. They can understand the bigger picture. Now, moving on from that, if we think around creativity and ethics, an AI ultimately optimizes for specific goals without a moral compass. So an AI cannot ultimately make an ethical decision. You may ask it an ethical question and it may give you what you think is a correct and ethical answer, but it isn't actually making that reasoning. It's just regurgitating information that it's been trained on. And so this is really important, right? Because a person can make a critical decision. They can interpret a scenario, understand right and wrong. They can understand if there's any ethical concerns, understand if there's any moral concerns. Whereas an AI ultimately is thinking of things in a black and white manner. It is pattern recognition, and it's giving you an answer based on, all of the data it's been historically fed on, rather than the real-time context that a person is living within. Um, it's also worth mentioning that attackers are creative, right? As much as we are, as the good guys, are creative in defending our organizations, attackers equally, unfortunately, are creative as well. So an attacker could develop a new attack, and if it's brand new and our AI defense tool has not been trained on that particular attack, Well, it's not going to be able to detect it because it's never seen this thing before. And in that way, AI models can be circumvented. Now, there is some caveats to this. I'm going to talk about training AI a bit later, but ultimately, AI is not an infallible solution. Again, adaptability, I've talked about that. I won't mention that again. The final thing that I think is interesting, so that the final point down at the bottom, so a person, if they have the right kind of motivation, they may find protecting your organization fun and engaging. And that may seem a silly thing to say, but that will lead to a person being engaged with your company more. They will build relationships within your business. They will be proactive. They will care about your organization. And AI ultimately cannot care about your business, right? There is no emotional element there. And for that reason, there's always this personal element with a human that an AI can't fulfill. Now, if we think of that personal element and extend that to a worst case scenario, let's now assume you've unfortunately been breached, some data has been stolen, and we're in an incident response scenario where there's crisis management ongoing. This is where, again, a person can understand what are the business's priorities, what are the risks to the business, is it reputational damage, is it financial damage, is there any compliance impact? What kind of stakeholders am I dealing with? How are they like as people? And a person is going to do a much better job in a crisis scenario at handling all of those things, whereas an AI can't really deal with the emotional element of a cyber incident. And I can promise you that they are quite emotional events. The other thing to think about is people trust people over and above AI. So you may trust the AI that you use, but ultimately, I think it's fair to say that you would trust a person that you know much more. And that's because you have a relationship again, right? So that's very important. And in a crisis scenario, having human leadership involved, people making decisions with context, using their intuition, using emotional intelligence, is something that AI can't mimic. At least not at the moment. Maybe in 5 years we'll come back to this presentation and it'll all be incorrect. But at least for now, what I've said so far is true. So these are just a summary of some of the points that I've mentioned. A few things just to call out in addition. So AI models can't explain why they make a decision. They just make a decision. Equally, they can't invent a new idea. And that's because AI is trained on existing information. Now, AI of the future, I'm sure will be able to invent new things, but AI of today is trained on historic data. And what that means is that it is over leveraged based on historic information. Um, all of those 3 points there are really, really key because although AI is incredibly impressive, it can't do everything. And that's something that I really want to stress here. Okay, so if we think then of the combination of people and AI, there's an ideal model that we can come up with. So the way I've kind of broken this down, I've taken an interesting approach potentially is around soft skills. And I think actually AI does have some soft skills. So I'm going to take you through a bit of a comparison on the screen here. So the first one is critical thinking, and play along in the background. Before I bring up the scores here, have a think of how you would score things. So in terms of critical thinking, I think we can all agree that a human can make critical decisions, right? So a person can make an informed decision even if there is ambiguity, but AI doesn't have true reasoning ability. It can't think using context necessarily. If we then think about curiosity and learning, I'm giving obviously the person a huge thumbs up here. AI, I'm giving kind of a middling score, so an orange or amber score there. And the reason is that AI, in a sense, can learn. So I mentioned on a previous slide that AI is ultimately trained on historic data. It can only compute things based on the information it's previously been fed, which is all true. But AI can learn to an extent. So within a lot of security tools now, you can mark an event or an incident as, say, a true positive or false positive. Well, that action ultimately is taken by a human, so the human's doing the learning, but that learning can be passed on to the AI. So if I mark, an event as a false positive, the AI will learn that in that particular context, that event was a false positive. So I can actually train my AI, but it doesn't really learn on its own. It requires a person to interface with it, which is why it's kind of, there's a bit of both happening there. Around pattern recognition, I'm being a bit cheeky. So AI ultimately, if we're talking about pure computational power, AI is far better at pattern recognition. But people are good at recognizing subtlety and novelty, something that I mentioned earlier. So a known pattern that is, very binary, very black and white, and AI is going to be a million times faster. But a person is still pretty good at pattern recognition, right? They can consider context in a different way. Now we think of speed, yeah, AI wins. There's no real contest here. AI can process things infinitely more quickly than a person can, and there's no way we can argue with that, to be quite honest. Now around performance, again, I don't think there's any argument here. AI certainly has the edge, and that's because we get tired. After an 8-hour shift working in a SOC, I can guarantee that the analysts are tired. Their attention span is reduced. They won't be as alert as they perhaps would have been at the start of the day. AI doesn't have those issues, right? It can't get tired. It can't get bored. Communication. Again, being a bit cheeky, so humans obviously can build relationships, build rapport, can communicate in lots of different ways, some of which AI can't do. So we can have a chat face to face. AI can't, at least right now. Again, future AI perhaps can, but at least right now we can't speak to our AI face to face. AI, however, can provide instant explanation. So if it computes ultimately a large data set, it can provide an instant summary. So we've all probably used ChatGPT. If I ask it a question, in a matter of seconds, it's giving me a detailed answer. That speed of communication is huge, and that's why I'm giving AI a partial score here, because it does have an edge in some instances. So around creativity, I think again an obvious one. So humans can innovate. AI is limited to the model that is trained on. Yes, it can learn slowly within that model, but it can't learn outside of the model that it's based on. And that's just a current limitation. In terms of resiliency, I think again, humans, we get stressed, we get sick. Bad things happen to people, unfortunately. Whereas AI is always on, right? If you're paying the bill, AI is always there, always available, and it can run indefinitely with no breaks at all. So there's a relation to resilience and performance. I think there is a distinction there, but ultimately an AI is not going to get stressed or sick. And then finally, adaptability. So, of course, we are much better at adapting than AI is. So we can shift to a new strain of thought, a new context. We can use new technology after a bit of upskilling. Whereas if you were to create an adaptable AI, you would have to retrain that AI with additional data. Um, Ultimately, what we're learning on this page, again, is that AI is a force multiplier. So I think there's a pretty fair balance between where we as people and AI are strongest. And if you combine those things together, you can imagine you've got a real powerful combination here. So if we think then about some of the impact AI is having on the security workforce, there is now a change in demand for skill set. So if you think about if I was to go and hire, a SOC analyst or a security engineer or someone with a technical role, what I would expect is that yes, they've got cybersecurity expertise, that's a given. But in addition to that, I would want to understand, do they have general AI literacy? Do they understand how AI works? Do they understand how prompt engineering works? Can they create an intelligent prompt for an AI that will lead to a more intelligent outcome than just typing something with no real logic into an AI? I'd also expect some hands-on experience, so they might use Microsoft Security Copilot or an equivalent tool. So they've actually worked with a security-powered AI platform of some kind. I would also want to know that they understand how data and AI go together, or perhaps don't go together. So again, going back to what we talked about at the start of the session, I would want to make sure that they understand that inputting corporate data into an AI is potentially a really bad idea. I'd want to know that they can use AI for threat hunting and even threat intelligence. And I'd want them to be aware of adversarial AI. So we talked about Black Mamba, Fraud GPT before. I'd want them to know that these things exist because if they're working in my security team, they may need to protect my organization against these things. So if we think of augmentation, so humans plus AI, what are some of the things or some of the areas that AI can help in? So there's a whole bunch of them. I won't go through these one by one because we'd be here for far too long. So I'm just going to bring them up on screen and you can all take a look as I talk through some of them. So alert fatigue I've mentioned, that one's really huge, right? We can free up our humans to focus on the more important elements, use AI for the noise and the more computational heavy components. Um, we can also use AI for helping us with decision making. So AI may spot a particular bit of threat intelligence that a person has missed, and we can basically have the AI feed us that information. So if we set up our workflows correctly with AI security tools, they can work with the engineers in tandem, and we can have a kind of a bi-directional relationship where the person is feeding the AI information and then vice versa, the AI then feeds, the analyst information. So a number of examples on screen there. I won't go through them in any more detail. They're all things that I've covered already. So I just want to talk briefly around natural language interfaces. So sounds far more complicated than it is. Ultimately, it's a conversational interface. It's a way for your security team to talk to their security tools. So what I could do, for example, is I could ask my security tool, okay, show me all the users with suspicious login patterns for the last 24 hours. And of course, the AI will go and grab me all that data. It will get me all that information in seconds, far more quickly than I could have captured all of that on my own. I could then ask the AI, okay, show me all the external IPs, again in the last 24 hours, that triggered an MFA challenge. Again, a bit more complicated here, but the AI is going to grab that in seconds. It would take me more than a couple of seconds to get hold of that information. There's a few, as an end result of this ability to kind of talk to your AI, security teams can basically just ask for the information they need rather than creating their own queries or manually going to find it. So there's a speed efficiency there, right? We're using the AI for the computational heavy tasks, and then the people can deal with the output of that AI much more efficiently. We talked earlier about lowering the barrier to entry. So again, what's happening here is we're lowering the barrier to entry for cybersecurity teams. Right? I could take a junior analyst and I could train them on how to use AI, and that could really help them accelerate their career because the AI can assist them and provide them with the information they need without that person, requiring deep skills on how to create queries and interface with, raw log data and things like that. So lowering the barrier to entry, it can be good for the good guys, but also it does have advantages for the bad guys, as we talked about earlier. So some of you might recognize the logo on the right-hand side. That is the Microsoft Copilot logo. So I'm just bringing up two examples of Copilot. There's actually about a dozen by this point. So we've got M365 Copilot. That's not a security tool. Ultimately, it's there to enhance productivity. It's around collaboration. The reason I'm mentioning it is that if you were to input corporate data into M365 Copilot, there is a boundary there to your tenancy, so the data won't leave your business's environment there. If we then look at the security copilot element, so this is where we actually have a AI-powered SOC assistant. So this is a genuine AI tool, and what I mean by that is that there's plenty of security tools out there which use AI as a component of what they do. But Security Copilot is first and foremost an AI assistant for a SOC. So the example that I used earlier, where an analyst could ask AI, "Hey, get me all the IPs," that's what Security Copilot is for, at the most basic level at least. Okay, so feedback loops. So these are just some things where our cybersecurity team may take a number of actions that then feeds into an AI and creates this cyclical process. So if I was as an engineer or analyst was to mark something as a false positive or false negative, that the AI is then trained on that information, and as a result of it, the AI then improves its accuracy. And this is a cyclical process, so it's continual. I can train my AI within the model that it was created, and this just will improve the detection ability over time. So really important to understand that there is a continuous loop of feedback there and training. So I won't go into all the detail here. The main thing to take away is that there is that feedback loop. Okay, so it's important that we don't over rely on AI because what we don't want to have is increased complacency. We don't want skill degradation. We could even introduce a false sense of security in some instances and even detection blind spots. So we still need to be focused. We still need to be paying attention. We do not want to over rely on the AI because if we take our eye off the ball, that's when things go wrong. So really important that, AI is seen as working with the human team. It's not just something that you leave on its own to do its own thing. Okay. With that said, I'm going to take a break now, and Lewis is going to jump in, and Lewis is going to give you some really interesting stuff, some lessons from the front lines about real attacks that exist in the real world. So, yeah, take it away, Lewis.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Luke. Yeah, so as Luke had mentioned earlier, any one of us could go and utilize AI maliciously, and I've done exactly that. I spent the last few days thinking of the different ways in which we've seen AI creep into incidents that we've dealt with, and then I've gone and replicated some of those things just to try and understand on a more deep level how easy it could be for threat actors. So I'm going to run you through some case studies here. I won't spend too long, so I think it's nice to have some time at the end for questions and answers. But one of the core ways we're seeing AI creep in is advancing social engineering. There's sort of three key ways in which we see this, and the first one I want to talk about is creating scam websites. Now, what you can see on screen at the moment is it's a credential harvesting website, and this took all of 35 seconds for me to create using AI. Now, this genuinely does work. I won't send you the link so that you don't lose your credentials, but you can go onto this website, you can put your credentials in, and it will send them to somewhere for me to see. Now, it genuinely is that easy. Now, obviously, having a credential harvesting website is one thing. Getting people to go to it in the first place is kind of another step we have to overcome. But AI could help us with that as well. And that's why I went to it and I said, hey, give me a phishing email. I need something that people can click, right? So they can go to my credential harvesting website. And again, in this point, we're one prompt deep, and I've got a very convincing phishing email that's not asking the user to talk to me about the problem. It's not asking them to go and handle it themselves. It's giving them the answer inside the email, and that is to click that link and go and get their credentials harvested. Now, it sounds nice and easy. People don't always fall for phishing emails, though, so sometimes we want a more complicated method. Now, this one took a little bit of work, but it really wasn't a big hurdle to cross. So I needed sort of a way to impose something onto someone. I wanted their information, whether that's their password. Ultimately, I was still trying to get them to go to that fake login portal. AI did a great job here. It's one of the things I think that things like ChatGPT do really well is they do try and protect people by stopping threat actors in some ways. I think this was the fourth or fifth attempt I did putting this prompt in, but all I had to do eventually was tell it that I was writing a book. I gave it some context on what was going on inside the book with the characters, and then ultimately it gave me a step-by-step, and it explained to me how I should go about trying to fool that person into going to my website so that I can harvest their credentials. Luke had mentioned earlier about communication, and one of the challenges being AI doesn't have things like personality in it. Sort of, you can trust a human more, and I think this is a great counterpoint to that. You can see under point 4 in its response, it's actually giving me advice on how to reassure the person, so that ultimately they fall for the scam that I'm trying to route them into here. So this is one of the more common ways we see AI creep in now. Phishing emails a couple of years back were always full of problems, spelling mistakes, clear sort of indications that they were phishing. You don't get that anymore, and it therefore becomes harder for technologies like Defender, things like email gateway security, to see that they're phishing emails because they can be very convincing on the surface. One of the other ways we see AI creep in is through the use of scripts and exploits. Now, what this essentially means is, Luke had touched on this earlier, is you can use AI to help you build scripts. And it's one of the themes that Luke's been talking about is lowering that barrier for entry. Now, I might be, say, a threat actor on your device. I might be trying to target a particular application I don't have experience of. I might see there's an old version of VLC media player, for example. I don't know how to find that exploit. I can get AI to complete that for me, right? I can ask it, hey, how do I exploit this particular thing? And it will go ahead and write me a script to complete that. No, it's not always done in that kind of fashion. Sometimes you'll see it in an automated fashion, right? You might have your system set up to target a particular endpoint and to run hundreds of different exploit attempts against things for things that haven't been seen before, haven't been attempted before. And ultimately, the AI is able to process and complete those actions significantly quicker than perhaps a normal pen tester would. Myself and Luke were having an interesting conversation yesterday about how things like DDoS present in the wild. And quite often that'll be the sort of cases where you see these automated exploit findings. People might DDoS your business, but while they're trying to disrupt you on the surface, what they're actually doing is using a system to automate exploit finding in the background. And you won't notice that happening because you're dealing with your DDoS attack while it's going on. One of the things Luke had referenced earlier is about polymorphic malware, and there's really two key ways in which we see this happening. So one of the less common ways is you'll see files embedded with the ability to call out essentially to like a C2 server that is a LLM, a large language model. And that will go ahead and based on parameters given to it, or about the device that it's on, it will try and find exploits. It's quite similar to automated exploit finding. And then it will say, okay, I'm running on this kind of OS. I've got this application next to me. It's on this version, etc., etc. And it will go and embed scripts that the AI will be able to generate for it live, and it will be able to attempt to complete those exploits. It's quite scary because it essentially means once something is on your device, it's not like a targeted specific path that it has to follow. It can adapt to what it knows is around it at that point. It's quite a scary way. I mean, we haven't explicitly seen that in the SOC yet, but I dread the day that we do. One of the things that we have seen, and I'll just touch on it, is the other sort of polymorphic thread, is we'll see files change themselves. So you might see a piece of ransomware deploy on one device, and when it laterally moves to a second device, it will edit itself. What this does is create challenges for containment. So you might have a particular hash on device A. By the time it gets to device B, it's now on a completely different hash, right? And it's acting in a slightly different way, which means behavioral engines will treat it differently. You can't put blacklists in place for the hashes. It can create quite complex challenges that ultimately need you to be extremely quick to be able to respond to them. And AI enables that sort of without breaking a sweat. One of the more common ways we see scripts and exploits being used, and we've sort of seen this in our SOC, is enabling insider threats. It's really easy for anyone who's been given that leg up into an organization to be able to go off to an AI and say, hey, like, I'm using this application, help me exploit this, or like, I want to work out how to get data out of this person's account, or whatever that is, right? It's really good at taking people who might just be disgruntled employees, they might just be a bit annoyed, XYZ, and it can enable them into something that they're not, right? And ultimately that can be damaging to your business. So one of the third most common ways that we see this coming up is in relation to voice cloning and deepfake. So essentially, this is the ultimate goal is to impersonate someone and then cause damage of some kind. And the kind of life cycle this goes through is that a threat actor would choose a person to emulate. They would then use various AI tools that are available to generate a cloned voice, and that would involve giving it, say, samples of data. They might, if you were trying to impersonate like a movie star, for example, you might give them clips of the movie with them talking. If you're, say, you're trying to impersonate someone on LinkedIn, you might call them up, have a couple of conversations with them, and then you could chuck those voice clips across and you could generate a realistic sounding voice off the back of those conversations. It's something that you may have experienced yourself. I know I get this personally, but I'll receive calls where the line is dead and there's no one on the other end. Quite often those calls will be looking to get snippets of your voice. Now, 5 years ago, that was so they could complete things like voice authentication through PayPal's payment system and various others like that. But nowadays, it's more than likely so they can try and copy you. And while it may not affect businesses directly, on a personal level, it will be used to do things like, scam mothers and pretend to impersonate their children, and then, give the mum a call and say, "Hey, can you send me some money?" Right? And it won't be long before we see this sort of targeting businesses as well, where you might have, say, a CEO being impersonated and calling someone else up in the business and saying, "Hey, I need you to do this for me," or "Give me access to this," right? And then that will ultimately create some quite complex problems. If you wanted to be really, really sort of fun and wacky with it as a threat actor, you could also extend this to sort of video impersonation. I'll drop a link in the chat just now. So sort of a blog from KnowBe4 about when they had this kind of incident occur for them. And someone impersonated both the voice and the video of someone else, ultimately to try and get a job. It never went anywhere, luckily, but it could have been quite severe for KnowBe4 if it did happen. Now, one of the things, Luke, is also what's up on the screen at the moment. I know we always talk about how powerful AI is, and I wanted to actually show you what it looks like in real time. So what you can see at the moment is a time lapse. Ultimately, this took me 26 minutes to go from I wanted to achieve something malicious to having an application that could fish a list of people I'd given it and go ahead and send them along to my credential harvesting website. So there's 3 key steps here, and all of them used AI. I got the AI to explain to me how to perform the cyber attack, and that included telling me sort of how I should do the targeting and all these other bits of information. And then I asked it how I should weaponize this attack into a phishing email. And then I got it to complete various other components of this as well, like creating the credential harvesting website for me. And as I said, it was around 26 minutes total from I wanted to achieve something all the way through to, you can see it just pop up there. We're probably about 22 minutes in at this point. That is what the credential harvesting website looked like. So there's a couple of screenshots coming up at the moment. This is what the ultimate output of it was. We have a website, we have emails going out to users that are trying to phish them. Now, I think it's really important to highlight here, obviously at CyberOne, we're not using this maliciously, but also it really does show you just how easy it can be. And this is what threat actors are doing. They might be sitting in their basements, they might be, someone in a state government the other side of the world. But either way, wherever they are, whoever they are, the amount of things they're able to achieve just by utilizing AI is becoming increasingly scary every day and exponentially growing. As Luke had talked earlier about some of the more complex threat actor-based AIs, those things will start doing things like this automatically. And then the amount of attacks, things we're seeing, will just exponentially grow over the next few years. Not trying to scare you, but if you aren't looking at ways to address the threats that are coming from AIs currently, now is probably a good time to start having those thoughts.
Okay,
cool. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lewis. Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, as Lewis said, 26 minutes to create, a malicious website, send out some phishing emails, and harvest some credentials. That's pretty quick, right? So we really need to be getting on top of our AI security. So just to summarize the session, I'm not going to go through these in huge detail, but ultimately we should be looking at combining human and AI teams together to work in combination, and ultimately to take all the strengths of both a person and an AI and benefit from both of them. That's the ultimate goal here. AI can solve repetitive and computational heavy tasks, pretty much instantly, and that we can bi-directionally learn, right? As I said before, humans and AIs can exchange information and learn from each other. So just as a closing thought, and feel free to quote me on this, I think it's a pretty cool quote. So I am absolutely gonna, yeah, if you want to quote me on LinkedIn, I won't say no. So in my view, AI won't replace cybersecurity professionals, but those who use AI will replace those who don't. So I think this is really the key message. If you were to distill everything we've gone through today, that is really the major takeaway. So with that said, I really appreciate everyone's time. I just want to mention again, we will be at InfoSec in June, in the 3rd to 5th of June. And we've also got a number of other webinars upcoming. One of those is going to be focused around data security, which has a really strong link to AI. So that session will be of high value if you found this one interesting. So please consider registering for those. We have a couple of those scheduled in, as you can see on screen. Just in other news, so I mentioned Tracy at the start of the call. I mentioned our data and AI certification with Microsoft. Lewis, who you've just heard from, publishes some stories from the SOC on a routine basis. So I think we're turning this into a kind of series of some sort. So please check us out on LinkedIn. Please visit our website and you can see some real world examples of some of the things we protect our customers from within our SOC. We've also got a newsletter, so feel free to subscribe to that and to learn about the latest trends and things we're observing in the industry generally. And then just finally, some of you with some Microsoft licensing may be eligible for what's called a funded engagement. So you can see in sort of the pinky purple color, there's a data security engagement that has quite an AI heavy component where we will help you understand, what data your organization has and how to protect it. If you are considering an AI tool like Copilot, the one on the blue on the right-hand side, there is a Copilot readiness assessment that you may be eligible for as well. So if you have an interest in some of the Microsoft tools, please reach out to our team. We will double check with Microsoft if you are eligible for any funding. And if you are, all of that funding gets passed on to you. So please consider all of those. So like I said, that's all for today. I really do appreciate everyone's time. And thank you all for listening.